hundreds of millions of years. Over a third of our genome has been shared between cells because it's got the fingerprints of retroviruses on it. Because when a cell makes the code it wants, it does it with what is called a retrotransposon, which, like an engineer, that's only the size of a molecule. And they are first described by the brilliant Barbara by McClintock. They work hard changing the DNA. This is what hospital superbugs do. That's how they protect themselves against drugs in hospitals. But it's how my nose cells do, my fingers, everything does. All cells do this. They adjust their DNA to protect us. Sometimes they will go, eureka, and say, right, we've got the answer. This new bit of DNA is what we need, gives us protection. Now, we're multicellular creatures, and it's silly to say that every cell of our body has to invent the wheel for itself. The next thing that little bit of code has to do is to get to other cells. It adds a small piece of DNA called an MA domain to the end of a retrotransposon. That turns it into a retrovirus. Yes, the retrovirus, the same thing that we're blaming on AIDS. The cell then buds it out through its soft membrane, its skin, which is very pliable. Proteins form around it to protect the precious cargo of a lovely new piece of DNA. It goes out into the space between our cells. It's got markers on the outside to tell the cells what it's got inside it. Other cells reach out for it, draw it into themselves, take that precious cargo, and they put it in their inner sanctum. They put it in their genome, in their DNA. They incorporate it. That's how much they trust it, and that's how they've done for the last few 100 million years. And that's why we find 1/3 of our DNA has been transported from cell to cell. It's how we evolved. It's how all creatures evolved. The retrovirus is now being found at the center for human life, for all life on our planet. And this is transforming biology.
And yet this is the very same concept that Gallo and others were looking to say was a pathology, the cause of AIDS. We only have a few minutes left for this part of our discussion. Who else would like to ask a question or make a statement in the audience? Please, Steve.
Just today in the car radio, I heard an announcement that there were some new discoveries about AIDS, and it said that evidence indicates that AIDS is older than we thought, that instead of coming on the scene in about 1930, it's probably earlier from analyzing DNA. Now, what they were analyzing to come up with this press release?
It's because 1/3 of our DNA is retroviral. And so, of course, it's older. Retroviruses help form us since we are individual cells, before we were fish. This evolutionary process started very, very early. And I'm not at all surprised they're now finding that it's before the beginning of the AIDS epidemic. Because if this bit of genetic code was there around before AIDS started, and we've got clear dates, AIDS started in the 1970s, there was no diagnosis of AIDS. The first clinical diagnosis of AIDS was in 1981 in the CDC document. I read that document. It's fated for reporting AIDS. That document actually states, 4 young men in an LA hospital, it seems they have no infectious illness at all. There's no sign of infection in these 4 men. I mean, I was also staggered to read that, because that is literally the first report that the CDC say they found AIDS.
But if retroviruses were around from earliest times, why did this new announcement say, well, they added 10 or 15 years earlier than 1930 to the advent of AIDS, when they could have said a million years? How do they come up with these specific announcements? They must have something, I hope, I think.
Yeah, it's because nowadays they use a test called PCR, polymerase chain reaction, the inventor of which is a Nobel laureate, who also says that AIDS can't be caused by a retrovirus. And yet this is a test used in every laboratory today to find viruses. It doesn't look for the entire genome that's inside this little message. I was sharing with a friend of Lynn Margulis, Nobel laureate, not Nobel laureate yet, She's a member of the National Academy of Science, Lynn McGuinness. And we were saying between ourselves, it's like the flash memory stick that the cell uses to send information from one cell to another. And he said he'd just come back from a workshop where many other scientists are discussing the same concept, that viruses are like flash memory sticks, taking information from cell to cell. So it's not surprising now, since they only identify, they use PCR to identify the virus, they don't look for the whole virus, they look for a tiny part of one protein that they claim is unique to that virus. Now, since we haven't analysed more than half of 1% of all the viruses that exist, it's actually
received every type of grant imaginable. He was one of the best and brightest. This is from Dr. Peter Duesberg, professor of molecular biology, University of California, member of the National Academy of Sciences, and he was the first person to map the genetic structure of retroviruses. He is a 5-time recipient of the National Institute of Health Outstanding Investigator Grant, and all federal grants terminated when he started challenging HIV theory. Quote, HIV is a latent and perfectly harmless retrovirus that most but not all AIDS patients happen to carry. To say that HIV is the cause of AIDS is to cast aside everything we know about retroviruses. The HIV theory is inconsistent, paradoxical, and absurd. The National Institute of Health is saying only experts understand AIDS. Well, who are they? They're the people who have worked on HIV, whose careers are completely based on HIV, and worst of all, almost all of them have huge commercial interests associated with it. They have companies, they have patents, they make megabucks. It's much more profitable than their university research. So, those are the judges. These people can afford to send you to Juniper, but they can't afford to give $50,000 to Peter Duesberg or someone else with an alternative hypothesis, like the one to test for drugs as a cause of AIDS. To prove them wrong would mean that they would risk losing their good reputation and their standing in the scientific community as well as their companies. The point that everybody is missing is that all these original papers Gallo wrote on HIV have been found fraudulent. Well then, that throws into question the entire HIV hypothesis, doesn't it? The HIV hypothesis was based upon those papers, unquote. Now, Nobel Prize winner, professor of molecular biology, Harvard University, quote, Walter Gilbert, I would not be surprised if there were another cause of AIDS and even that HIV is not involved. Duesberg is absolutely correct in saying that no one has proved that AIDS is caused by the AIDS virus. He is absolutely correct that the virus cultured in the laboratory may not be the cause of AIDS. And then to the
Can I just mention this one?
Yes, go ahead.
The scientist I just mentioned, who Nobel Prize laureate, he invented the polymerase chain reaction that every laboratory in the land uses currently to identify viruses. He stated, years from now, people will find our acceptance of the HIV theory of AIDS as silly as those who as we now find those who excommunicated Galileo. And in Regardless, who there is actually, I'm not going to say too much, there's a paper in publication about to come out about alternative theories of AIDS at the moment. We are moving on. Science is moving on and leaving the HIV theory behind it.
Dr. Heinz Sanger, Professor Emeritus of Molecular Biology, the Max Planck Institute for Biochemistry, quote, HIV cannot be responsible for AIDS. After years of intensive critical studies of the relevant scientific literature, as an experienced virologist and molecular biologist, I came to the following surprise conclusion. There is actually no single scientifically really convincing evidence for the existence of HIV. Not even once has such a retrovirus been isolated and purified by the methods of classical virology. And that is Professor Emeritus of Virology. That means he is the highest academic ranking of a human being can have in a field with hundreds of published papers at a very respected institution. We have many virologists. We have thousands of scientists who are now saying Gallo was wrong. And one last one here, we have MD, PhD, Medical Director, Iris Medical Foundation, Dr. Paul